When they think of diversity, they limit it to the color of one's skin, gender identity, sex, sexual orientation, but also what about different ways of thinking? What about, depending on your work, geographic diversity? That might be important, especially if you're working for a national organization or something like that. I think that that's important too, because otherwise you can be in an echo chamber. If you have everyone who's thinking too similarly and you don't have diversity of viewpoint, then that's a problem too. So I think number one, there has to be a will. And in terms of getting people of color and women and LGBTQ people in higher leadership positions in organizations, I would say for community-based organizations, to the extent that constituents or clients can, or people who get to serve on the boards, for those people who really have a voice, to really elevate their voice and say, we're not seeing ourselves or our backgrounds reflected whatsoever. This is a problem. And to feel empowered to say that, because sometimes, almost always, you have to apply pressure on organizations to change. They rarely change on their own without any kind of pressure. They really don't.
Awesome. And I think with that, we'll pivot right away into the roundtable discussion. But we'll take a quick break and reset.
Chicago. The Windy City, the city of broad shoulders, the second city, is complicated.
Known for its legacies of segregation and political corruption, Chicago has a lot to grapple with.
On Chicagoland, we bring you conversations with activists, journalists, politicians, and others who are working to address these issues.
You can find Chicagoland wherever you listen to podcasts.
From University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts,
this is Chicagoland.
Okay, welcome back to Kinda Sorta Brown. This is Rei Bertoldi, and we're still here with Kelly Saulsberry. We can do a little bit of roundtable.
Awesome. Let's hit the ground running.
All right. I guess I'll go first. So the question I wrote is mostly about economic empowerment, since you mentioned a little bit about that with your work. And I think I've mentioned in the past that I feel the more boxes you check in terms of marginalization, the less financially empowered you feel and less financial literacy you have as a community. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious to know, do you have any policy ideas that you think could help rectify this?
In terms of empowerment?
Mm-hmm. Or at least spreading financial literacy to communities that typically don't have access to it.
I see what you're saying. Well, it's interesting. When I was on the board of Affinity, so I'm still affiliated with the organization, but so Affinity Community Services is the organization I mentioned earlier. And when I was on the board, I helped develop a collaboration between Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, and Fifth Third, and the organization to provide a series of workshops. Some of them were focused on, financial literacy 101, credit repair, but then also because our constituents are not monolithic and they have come from a variety of different socioeconomic classes and those and desires and needs. There was also a series that Merrill Lynch did in terms of wealth generation and protection, estate planning, and those kinds of things. So I think that there are a couple things. One, tap into perhaps the expertise and the skills in organizations that might be right there, right in front of you. And I think sometimes we bypass that, overlook that. There could be people who, through their own experience, as well as their education and things that they've had to do in their lives or for their work or through their relationships, can really bring that to the organization or the community of constituents or clients or whoever the audience is. But then also, if that expertise or knowledge or experience is not there, then to really engage partners who have that and who can bring their resources to the table. And that's exactly what we did. We were able to really provide that to the community. And there were people who found it very helpful. And it's great because it covered a range from financial literacy 101 and credit repair and those kinds of things to things such as how to better ways to be stewards of your resources and to generate more revenue and estate planning. And to me, to be able to provide that is also important because something else in terms of Black communities in this country, and particularly, well, let's focus on Chicago, particularly Black American communities in Chicago, often the perception is that we're all in poverty. And there are some pockets of our communities that are definitely struggling, and I don't think that we should try to pretend otherwise or anything, but there are also communities and families and individuals that are thriving. And so then how do we then share what we know to support other people and in their process in creating lives that they want to live with less financial stress and wanting to achieve their own financial needs and desires. So I think that's number one. And number two, this isn't a policy, but it's an action. I think supporting local businesses in those respective communities. I know I'm thrilled when I see another Black-owned business open up in Bronzeville, because unlike in other, for lack of a better word, ethnic communities in Chicago, it's rare in Black neighborhoods in Chicago to actually find Black-owned businesses unless they are barbershops or hair salons. They'll be Black-owned then, but any other kind of business, whether it's a gas station or whether it's, call it the beauty supply stores and those kinds of the restaurants, hardly ever Black-owned. And so I think that even by just showing up to support good businesses that, are also Black-owned, I think that's another way. So I know that's focusing mostly on Black American communities, but that's what I am. So that's what I think about.
No, I really appreciate hearing that. I guess with that said, do you have any ideas that our listeners could probably check out, some Black-owned restaurants and Black-owned businesses near Hyde Park and around the area?
Yes. So there are a few places. One is Bibliophile. Is actually owned by a couple, and one person in that couple is a Black guy. And delicious. They're the same people who own Fabiana's Bakery. So Fabiana's Bakery and Bibliophile, they're both on East 55th Street, if I'm not mistaken. Delicious baked goods, and then also Bibliophile has delicious food, like good apps and alcohol-infused desserts. Sorry for those of you who don't drink. I do. But absolutely delicious. And then there's also a restaurant called Virtue that is delish, and it's also Black-owned. I always encourage folks in Hyde Park, particularly University of Chicago students, to venture beyond the U of C area. So if you want to go just next door, a little bit north, it's on Ellis. It's called Norm's Bistro. And it's great that summer is coming up because they have live music, jazz and other forms of music in the summer. Their gumbo is pretty yummy. And they have... you can get drinks and stuff. So yeah, Norm's Bistro is another one. And then there's a restaurant, I think it's called Yassa. It's on, it's a Senegalese restaurant in Bronzeville. It's on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive Boulevard. And I want to say it's near 35th and King Drive, 35th and South King Drive. But it's a Senegalese restaurant and it's delicious.
And they will give you a pile of food.
A pile of food. It is really good. And I can't forget one of my favorite coffee shops, Sip and Savor. There is a location in Hyde Park. And I want to say it's on 53rd Street. So Sip and Savor. I know the owner. He's wonderful. And I get a mocha every time I go in. But the Sip and Savor I go to is one on 43rd Street, which is literally a few blocks from my house. So want to get some coffee and get out of the Starbucks world? Go to Sip and Savor. So those are a few spots that come up right away.
I'm checking all those out. I can definitely verify that Bibliophile is delicious.
It is.
And very potent.
Oh, it is.
Very potent.
I have to also plug that new, vegetarian vegan place that opened up next to Soul Shack.
Yeah, I haven't been.
So good.
Is it good? Oh, wow.
Their Impossible Burger is amazing.
Oh, wow.
Amazing.
I gotta try it. I gotta try it.
Oh, yeah.
I found it really disappointing. Sorry, this is Izzy here, viewers, listeners. I got the Philly cheesesteak. Somehow it was $25 for a 6-inch Philly cheesesteak and fries and a drink. Oh. But I want to go back because it does look really yummy and I hear good things. I don't want to take away from that. Support Black-owned businesses.
So not the Philly cheesesteak, but definitely the burger.
Oh, wow.
Man, y'all are making me out myself as a sustainability fraud because I'm refusing to try this Impossible Burger in lieu of meat. So, local hypocrite refuses to do what's good for the planet. In other relevant news. So sort of continuing on, I'd love to get your opinion, Kelly, specifically. What do you think is going to be the role of us as the sort of the next generations of policy leaders and people who are training and equipping themselves to sort of really hit the ground running in the coming years. We've seen, I think, divisions surrounding identity grown really, really, really strong here in the States. So how do you think we as policy leaders should be channeling our identities to bring people together instead of to drive wedges between groups?
And thank you so much for that question, because as powerful as I think our identities can be in helping to give us a variety of different lenses through which to navigate the world, different spaces, think about different experiences and political realities, I am concerned in terms of the downside of being so focused on on particular identities to the exclusion of something broader that we may be at risk of being myopic, very insular, and very parochial. So I am a Black American, I am a woman, I am a lesbian. Those things mean something to me and definitely shape how I walk through the world. And I don't feel I have to leave any of those things at the door. There's no doubt about that. However, I still am a human being, and I share space with other human beings in this city. There are certain needs in terms of safety, in terms of being part of a larger ecosystem, in terms of being a part of this environment that I share with other human beings, regardless of their race or their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And so I think that we can develop incredible experience and knowledge and empathy from our identities, but I don't think that we should allow the specificity of our identity to prevent us from seeing the broader collective and shared needs and sometimes overlapping and shared interests. Because then it can go down the road of intense tribalism. And we don't need more of that in our politics. We don't need more of that in our discourse. And some people think that means that you're assimilating, and those kinds of things. It's not about that. It's about, at the end of the day, we all live in this country. And we have to have a strong country. I think so. And we want our democratic institutions, to be as strong as they can possibly be. And so I think that requires all of us to also see ourselves as a part of a collective at the same time that we respect our personal experiences based on our ethnicities, our religions, and those kinds of things. So, some people don't agree with that, but I'm all about that.
I think you found some supporters here for sure.
Great.
Okay, so here's sort of another shameless plug here for the Harris School.
Are we talking about Harris?
Oh, yeah, we're talking about Harris.
It's that time.
So in what ways do you think that Harris really succeeded in preparing you to take the next steps in your professional career or to do the things that you really wanted to do? Mm-hmm. And in what ways do you think were maybe missed opportunities or things that we should have done more to sort of de-silo ourselves during our time here?
That's a great question. All of these are really great questions. I'm really enjoying this interview. Y'all are so smart and insightful. I learned quite a few things here at the Harris School. And as I mentioned earlier, coming here is one of the best investments I could have made in terms of my development, professionally and intellectually. And that's because I felt like I kept hitting this low glass ceiling in these small nonprofit organizations where I was working that were doing great work, but there just really wasn't an emphasis whatsoever on development and opportunities to grow and expand and move up and that kind of thing. And so through my volunteer work and then my paid work, when I determined that it was public policy I was interested in, it was a dear friend of mine, and you may have heard of her, Kim Hunt.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Kim is my best friend, and she was my maid of honor at my wedding last year and is a Harris alum, as you know. And she's the one who strongly encouraged me to consider the Harris School. She said public policy, it's about not accepting things at face value and really getting behind, a facade and what's presented, asking those critical questions and shedding those preconceived notions. And thinking about, okay, this is an ideal that I want, but what is it that I can do to help us get us closer to that ideal? And is this going to be effective? Will it work? And she said, these are the kinds of things that, an education at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy will do. And she says, it's going to be rough at times and really challenging, but these are the kinds of things that you will learn. And I did find that. I mean, Math is not my strong suit, so I cried over problem sets my first quarter. And my father had died some months before I started the program, before I started Harris, so I was already not in the best emotional state when I started. And I just remember going, I knew it would be hard, but boy, is this stuff hard. The stats and the econ, and it's interesting, and I love the professors that I had, and I loved coming